I call the committee of the whole meeting to order for Monday, May 5th, 2025. Can I get a motion to adopt the agenda of the committee of the whole meeting for Monday, May 5th, 2025? Mover, please. Councillor Graham. Councillor Peabody. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thanks. Okay, new business. We'll move right into the new business. This morning we have Scott Driver, Murray Robertson, and Paul Rolkoff from Cranbrook Fire and Emergency Services discuss pre-hospital care system in Cranbrook. Scott, Murray, Paul, floor is yours.
Morning, Mr. Mayor and Council. Thank you for your patience. Yeah, so today we brought a presentation to talk about pre-hospital care with Council, as it's been requested a few times throughout the last calendar year. With me today, I have our senior firefighter, Paul Relkoff. He's the most experienced in the station today, so he's here to talk to you about some of the operational specifics that we do. And then I did want to also bring the new Deputy Chief, Deputy Fire Chief Murray Robertson is with us today. It's his first official visit with Council and Chambers, and so I wanted to introduce him and just have him in the room with us today. So as we get going, what I wanted to do is just let Paul Relkoff talk about some of the operational stuff with first responder. I think having a different voice from the truck, over 20 years of experience responding in the industry, quite a bit more recent experience. Paul's been working as a captain for the department for a really long time, and I thought it would be good to just have him kind of talk about first responder in the community and just have that conversation. So Paul said to me earlier, and I totally agree, is that this should be a conversation between Council and staff, and so Paul and myself and Murray can take any questions as we go. There is time at the end, but certainly if you need to discuss something as we go, just please feel free.
Good morning. Morning, Mayor Price, members of Council. Thanks for having me. Again, Scott just reiterated, or Chief Driver reiterated, this is a small presentation. It's here to create dialogue. I don't know what questions you need to know, so hopefully this triggers some questions and triggers some dialogue so we can answer what you need to know. Just starting off, I need to start with, we have a great working relationship with BCAHS. The relationship goes back and forth. They support us strongly at fires that provide the medical we need for our staff and for the public, and on calls, our relationship is amazing. So just want to thank them for what they do for us as well. To start off, just a little bit of clarity and definition. So it gets called lots of things. So our first responder medical service is what we do when we go out in the public and we provide medical service to the community. With that, there's two levels of care we do. So traditionally and originally, the level of care was the first responder medical care. That's the license level. It's named the same as the service, so it's a little bit confusing. And currently there is, for Cranbrook, it is EMR. So it's an emergency medical responder. It's one of the lower levels of paramedic in BC. Just start off with a little history of the service. Some of us in the room are involved in the history of how changes came about, and the original history is preceding my time in the fire department. So in 1989, the chief coroner made recommendations to the deputy health minister. One of the recommendations was the implementation and development of a first responder program. Didn't exist in BC till that time. His recommendation looked for, or was to have continual care beginning with first responders working cooperatively with ambulance extending right to the hospital. So that's what he wanted to see out of it. Why the chief coroner was involved? He was the voice for the dead at the time. When we're going that far down to make change, it's the theory of catastrophic reform. It's the theory of change needs to be made, and the chief coroner can make recommendations to change policies in the province. The goal was to improve public health, and I think we got that out of it. This wasn't reinventing the wheel. It was just new for BC. Lots of places across North America had been using fire or police to do pre-hospital care, understanding the complexities of getting ambulances and ambulance staffs because they have a bigger role of transporting, waiting in the emergency room, and then transferring that patient off to hospital staff. This layer has never been intended to replace the ambulance service in any way. It's just a layer of service to bolster pre-hospital care and prevent devastating outcomes. The goal of this layer is faster response if you call 911, getting life-saving care there right away if you call 911, improving survival rates, psychological benefits. These are stressful times when people call, not only the patient waiting when they're fearing for their lives, the family and the people surrounding them being in a state of stress. It helps, especially in our area with giant response areas for BCHS and ourselves as well, bridging the gaps at high call volumes and make sure somebody's there as well. So in communities now with these, with the chief coroner making the recommendations to the deputy health minister, had the option to start being in this program. It was an option for communities to do it. Most fire departments at this time only responded to fires or a few calls like that. It opened the door to adding value to our fire service. Everybody knows today the fire service does from A to Z. We do from hazmat to medical to fires. And occasionally we reevaluate. And if there's no risk, if there's no benefit, we move out of that service. Dispatch most recently was one of those where the cost of the service was too great, the strain on the staff was too much, and financially it didn't make any sense to continue to do that. So from 1991 to 2018, it slowly became a success. It slowly became what people in the community expected, that they would see a fire truck. If they didn't call, they would see a fire truck and an ambulance at a medical call. Around 2018, fire departments were still only restricted to providing the first responder level of care. So a very basic level of care. Across the province, it wasn't meeting the need. We weren't just on scene for a few minutes. We weren't able to provide life-saving interventions. We couldn't even give ASA or aspirin to a patient that was having a heart attack. It just truly didn't match what we needed to do when we had the longer waits for an ambulance. Delta Fire Department was one of the first fire departments to challenge it. We legally couldn't increase our level of care at that time. The acts that were in place prevented fire from providing any level of care higher than first responder. So Delta made the push. They went against the legislation, and they were the first large metro to set the bar and say that we're not going to be restricted on how we care for the people in our community. Following that, Cranbrook was there with support of councillors like Ron Popoff and Daniel Cardoza, and we made the push at all as well and moved to the EMR level of care. And it truly has served the people better. In no way did this increase our call volumes or our costs. We actually have a lot less operational requirements where we're not relicensing every 3 years. We just have to continue to get patient contacts and do our annual recurrence training. Since that time, changes have been made, and now fire departments can practice whatever level of care they so choose. So we were groundbreaking. We were in the lead of being able to serve our communities better. So a standard response, and Cranbrook, there truly is no standard response because we're managing what we have. So the captain on duty is responsible for managing the crew, the response, and there's no simple model. First and foremost, we always have to consider the need to respond to fires because that's our #1 mandate. It's very, very different than a large city where a fire truck's assigned to a call, and then when they're cleared that call, they're just reassigned to whatever's next. We are managing as captains the ability to serve our community. Crews often split up. And so the normal standard response would be 2 in a bush truck to keep that equipment down, to keep the usage down, and keep the engine ready to respond to fires. We also sometimes fully commit where we send the bush truck and an engine. It does seem like a lot of resources, and I do understand the community sees it as a lot of resources out there, but the reason for that is so the engine can leave the call if needed and go to another call and always be ready to go to a fire. And then there's the most extreme calls where, say, the patient is viable and it's going to be a lot of work, then we will commit the bush truck, the engine, and backfill the haul. But those are rare. That is a CPR call where we are getting a pulse back or the patient's viable, and it takes a lot of work. It takes multiple people doing CPR, paramedics pushing drugs, IVs being started, ventilating the patient, and then planning to scoop that patient up and carry him, load him in the ambulance, and continue those life-saving efforts all the way to the hospital. So those would be the times we would backfill the haul to replace us. The captain's got to consider the type of call, part of his decision making, the nature of call, and severity. So kind of talking into that, the location of the call with our response area. Sometimes if the crews are going to be going too far out of town, that requires us to backfill if we're at Acom and it is a high risk call as well. The location, we will send additional resources if it's a risk to our staff as well, to have somebody overlooking our staff while we're providing first aid. There's 3 main things we consider as well. It's responder safety first, public safety, and then the corporate liability, the need to respond. That's our hierarchy of considerations. For me, this is real. These are not orange calls, purple calls, red calls. These are people in my community. These have been people I work with. This has been my family. I have an opportunity to go and care for those people, and it's hard for me, and it never codes up as an orange, purple, or red. It's just serving people within my community. So a standard call is you would dial 911 and you would be asked police, fire, or ambulance. If you say ambulance, it will go off the EHS dispatch and Kamloops. The EHS dispatcher and Kamloops will take information from the caller, and then it will get automatically displayed on a computer screen in our fire dispatch in Kelowna what the call is and some general information on that. Kelowna Dispatch will radio us or page us out with a small amount of information, cardiac arrest with the civic address. Sometimes to follow, we get what's called a RIP run or a fax. On that, we'll have more information and more details, although it's not always accurate. From there, the captain decides what he's sending on that response. And we may get additional information en route of wait for police or EHS delayed, but that's not always the case as well. When we arrive at the call, and if fire's first, this is the window where we are tying up our crew. So it's the window where once we make patient contact, we can't leave the call. Right till we make it to the call and make patient contact, if we get a fire call, we can take off and attend that fire call because it's a higher priority within our system. If we make patient contact, we are now waiting for EHS to take over patient care, or we have to assess the patient and determine they don't need care right away, then we can clear the call. It would be abandonment if we left, and we could lose our medical license for that. Once we're there with ambulance, we stay to help if the patient's non-ambulatory, if they need assistance with the treatments, and they're really good if they don't need us after they've done our patient assessment for us to clear. So from the moment patient or EHS takes over patient care, we stay on scene, but we're ready to respond to the next. And it's quite often that we leave a call to go to another call. It's an option for us as well when we're there to be involved in our community. The people are in a state of stress. We work at talking to the family, calming down the situation, and supporting EHS while we're there. Just want to do a personal experience. So in my family, we've only had one real event where we called ambulance, and it ties into how I see the service in my community after almost 25 years of doing this. So on a snowstorm night, we were resources out on the highway for an MVA. I was called in as the extra firefighters to man the station. Also, search and rescue was out on an MVA past our response area. So our resources in the community were taxed. As soon as I got in, we went out on a cardiac arrest. We arrived on scene. We started doing CPR on the patient. An ambulance crew arrived. We had an amazing outcome. Regained a pulse, transported the patient. He lives and breathes and works in the community still. Now fast forward to a few years later, and my dad goes into cardiac arrest at a restaurant in the community. Bystanders start CPR, and fire arrives, takes over CPR from the bystanders. The ambulance arrives, and my dad's transported to the hospital. Fire stayed, helped my mom, cared for the people around. Some of fire left and went to the hospital and continued to work on my dad. The part of the story that amazes me is the person doing CPR on my dad was the person we brought back years later. And it's not an abnormal story. That's the sense of community, and that is caring in the community. And I'm lucky to have experienced these things, but that's the service we provide. So that's my story. Any questions, anything? I'm open for conversation on anything. This was just to generate questions or anything you have for me.
I still have quite a number of slides we're going to go through, and then we'll open it up. So I just really want to thank Paul for just sharing his experiences on the truck and as a community member. I think it's really valuable to have a different voice in front of council once in a while. You've heard me talking about it for years now, and just being able to bring in one of our captains who has a lot of real experience and recent experience. I've been off the truck for over a decade now, so I think it's valuable. And like he said, he's with us for the rest of the meeting. So if we have questions about how it actually works out in the field, I think Paul's a really valuable resource for that. So in order to talk about first responder, we do have to talk about the challenges that we face as a community as a whole for emergency response services, because first responder fits into our entire emergency response services. And so one of the big things that I'm noticing in the community of Cranbrook is that we're a service center. We do a lot of exporting of patients in Cranbrook, and so our healthcare system, our pre-hospital healthcare system, is often used to transport patients to Calgary. And so that number one primary ambulance on a Monday morning is in Lethbridge or driving down the highway through Radium to get to the Foothills Hospital. Like we do a lot of that service center stuff. And additionally, we have retirement care. We have lots and lots of social services in the community. We have a lot of pressures on us as the key city. We long wanted to be the hub of the Kootenays, and with being the hub of the Kootenays, there's a lot of emergency service demands that come with that. Like Paul mentioned in his, is we have a really large response area. Is the city of Cranbrook and our service agreements that make over $1 million come with it 155 square kilometers of response area. But in context, that's quite a bit smaller than what the ambulance does. They're very similar to the police. Is there is no place in the province they don't go, and so we have a response boundary. They do not. And oftentimes we're short on services inside the community because those response boundaries don't exist for our other two partners with police and ambulance. Another unique sort of perspective that we have in Cranbrook is that our mutual aid partners certainly are not close enough to help with medical calls, and very unlikely that they're going to be in any way, shape, or form close enough to assist us with respect to fire as well. So we really struggle kind of being on our own in the middle of rural British Columbia, but large enough that we are a service center. And as we move forward as a community, the last thing I want to talk about in terms of challenges is our density. And when I talk about that, I'm talking about vertical and horizontal. So as we infill and as we do multifamily dwellings, if we go up and we go to condos and apartment buildings, is those challenges increase as well. And it's basically just an inverse relationship. The more resources a family has, the less need they have for extra care. And the less resources that they have, the more need they have for extra care. And we in the fire service are extra care. So as we start infilling with multifamily dwellings, is we're also changing the socioeconomic kind of foundation of the community. And in that, there's more needs that come along with it. And so we just need to be cognizant of those particular challenges. Now, when we talk about the clinical response model, which was one of the things that Captain Relkoff talked about, is that BC Ambulance Service is providing an opportunity for communities to engage with them, and the process that by which we engage is pretty standardized. As you phone 911, you ask for a service, and from there on, it just kind of it goes out as was described by Captain Relkoff, and I think we've talked about it a lot in the past. But what the BC Ambulance Service has done a really good job of is trying to describe their level of acuity, which means how at risk the customer is. So when they call in, they talk with dispatch, the customer describes the problem that they have, and then it gets coded in a manner that makes it a purple call, which is they're in a heart attack, a red call, which means they're having chest pains, an orange call, which means they don't feel good, but it might be moving towards chest pains, a yellow call means they have a stomach ache. Kind of that kind of sliding scale of acuity or need for service immediately. And the ambulance service has used this model across North America and around the world. In British Columbia, they've started using it in the last decade, and they've bought into this model and system. And so what they've done is created a space for communities to opt in to their pre-hospital care system, like we have done since 1991. And well, I'll get to it at the end of the presentation, but they are changing the way they engage with communities as we go forward. And I think there's an opportunity there to have some more thorough discussion. So like I talk about is the need for resources in the fire department is often what I'm in front of council talking about. And it's why a lot of these conversations are coming back and saying, hey, we need to have more thorough discussions. But like I said at the very beginning of my conversation, is that we can't talk about first responder without putting it in the context of everything else that we're doing. So as the need for resources grows, it's because of reasons. And reasons are population growth, our density conversation. The call volumes are certainly one of them, and that's what we're here to talk about today, is primarily pre-hospital care driven call volumes. The geography that we live in, our industry, if we grow our industrial park fully, it's going to lead to more response calls, but they're not the pre-hospital care stuff. It's the other side of the equation that we're trying to balance it with. And then certainly climate related threats have been a lot of my work in the last 10 years and will continue to be for our service, but it's a different conversation. But I just wanted to talk about the entire risk profile is the important part of the conversation to remember, is that as the community is changing, as our society is changing, we in the fire service have to deal with all of the risk profiles, not just pre-hospital care. So if we go back to call volumes, and the primary driver on call volumes is shown pretty clearly on this slide, is that the bars in the front are our fire rescue calls, and the bars in the back are our pre-hospital care calls. And so over time, those are the quarterly reports that council has seen from myself. And so we can see over the last couple of years why there's been a little bit of uncertainty and some desire by council to want to change what's going on and what we're doing, because I've been sitting in front of you talking about the call volumes going up. And I do have to apologize. Call volumes going up is the easiest thing for me to talk about. But there's a lot of other things going on. And I was able to, and I'm happy to be able to, in the last 2 quarters, to be able to talk about our call volumes on the pre-hospital care side going down. I do think there's a win there. I can't attribute it to any one thing. I'm not certain what it's for, and I'm not in control of it. We didn't change anything as a community, but our experience with BC Ambulance and their need for assistance has gone down drastically in the last couple of quarters. And it's gone down to a place where our staff out in the field aren't worrying. They're not experiencing that uncertainty about the future, not wondering how they're going to keep doing this. We're at a place right now where we have a manageable call volume with the resources that we have in terms of pre-hospital care. Right? The driving forces in the fire service right now are going to have a lot more to do with climate change, the forest fire system, the density that we're looking at down the road in terms of what planners see and oftentimes the community sees as positive growth as we go vertical 6-story high density buildings. Those are going to be the drivers that, unless the first responder conversation changes, are driving resource needs. And so that small adjustment away from going 30% growth to stable is manageable with our current resources. But our fire side of the conversation is certainly getting challenging at that same time. I had our deputy chief take a look at the call data last week, and for 2024 is that all of the calls for pre-hospital care, there was a 31-minute average, and generally it's 2 people, sometimes it's 4, but the second 2 on that call are optional and they can leave. Abandonment occurs when everyone leaves, not when the captain and another firefighter leave. And then on the fire rescue side of things, you can just see that the resource need on fire calls is higher. There's almost always 2 vehicles going to those fire calls unless one's tied up in a medical, and they're there for twice as long. So we do, when we look at the data in the fire service, there's lots of different ways to look at it. This is just one simple way. You can squeeze in a lot more medical calls than you can squeeze in fire calls. And so we have to keep our eye on that as well. So this is the part of the conversation where I do want to talk about moving forward. And so just last week, BC EHS sent out to the fire service across British Columbia a new first responder service agreement template where they're going to require all the communities in the province to sign up formally. Currently, we are formally in an agreement with BC EHS to provide first responder services with EMR licensing. But not very many communities in the province of British Columbia are there. In our transition with the dispatch, they leveraged that transition and said they wouldn't dispatch us anymore if we didn't sign an agreement. So we kind of got looped into doing one of those, but it didn't change anything. It didn't change the way we did business with them. What they're doing today is they're coming up with a new formal agreement right across the province based on a report that came out about 5 years ago, the healthcare report. Do you guys remember when that one came out? So the BC government came out with a report, recommended the province formalize the agreements with communities across, and this is the result. So they've done some bargaining back and forth, come up with what they feel is a responsible agreement for communities to re-sign. And then on the back end of that is there's an operational response plan, which is where I see the opportunity coming for communities to define individually what they're going to help with and the level of care that they're going to provide. And so in the operational response plan, we have an opportunity to set out as a community the level of response that we want to do and adjust it when the resources get to be too demanding. And so with that opportunity in front of us, is I think there is a way to look at our current call volumes, understand that they're manageable, leave things as they are, and then when we see changes need doing, is there's an appropriate mechanism to pull a lever and change our resources and change our commitment to assisting them. And so that's what the province has put out just in the last week. I haven't reached out to any of the other communities that might be signing that immediately, but I am certainly engaging with the other fire chiefs that are involved in that conversation and the community, trying to figure out where the pulse is on terms of what communities are doing and where. And so in that agreement and in that operational response plan, we have an opportunity to define our response boundaries, declare the level of licensing that we're going to do, which EMR is the highest level inside that agreement, and then set out the level of response commitment that we want to do. And so at this point in the conversation, I really do think it's worth hearing from council, and we'll take some questions if you have them.
Councillor Graham.
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple of quick questions. Have we seen an increase in our WCB or short-term and long-term disability claims since we started the program in relation to this?
Since 1991?
No, like in the last 5 years.
Yeah, I'd have to look into that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then following up on what you're talking about around development, do you think that we need to start setting up a way to capture some of these new taxes that are being brought in? Like say when we get a 6-story building, we will get a tax bump from that. Should some of that be earmarked for fire and emergency services? So when we need to increase personnel or staffing resourcing, should we be looking at some kind of a fund or a reserve for that to help smooth the costs?
Yeah, certainly through Mayor Price to Councillor Graham is that I've been looking for a couple of years now at finding a mechanism that effectively flows money towards rescue service needs based on development that's occurring in community. I haven't found a really good tool yet. I know I've had some conversations with the planning department, the city's engineer. Mark and I have had a few conversations at director meetings to try and talk about how we project outward what the expenses are going to be as we start to do density and growth over geography. And so it is a tricky situation. I haven't found the right tool yet, but certainly I'm looking for ways to try and fund the resource needs because they're not directly aligned with linear infrastructure. And so a lot of the stuff that we have really works really well with linear infrastructure needs, but it doesn't work well with emergency response needs. So we're looking into that, yes.
Might as well go around the table then. Sure, Councillor Popoff.
Can't build enough. Thanks. Thank you. If I understand right, we're the ambulance when the ambulances are transporting out of town. We're the ambulance service response when the ambulances aren't in town. That's what I understood you saying. Is that generally the right answer?
So we deliver care, we don't deliver transport. So we're not the ambulance. We deliver life-saving interventions.
Sure.
And but with that, and one of the things that Captain Relkoff talked about is that there is a licensing issue with abandonment. And so because we come as a professional first response, like a medical license, is once you make contact with the patient, you cannot cease contact with the patient unless you're handing it off.
I was more referring to the comment that on a Monday, the ambulance are doing medical transport to Calgary, for example. And there's situations like that where one fully staffed, this is more about the ambulance service I'm trying to understand.
Mm-hmm.
So one fully staffed ambulance is off to Calgary. And there may be other examples like that where one ambulance fully serviced is off doing something out of Cranbrook. Do they have a second and a third ambulance fully serviced, ready to go? Or are we their backup because they're either out of town and or waiting for their staff to get to the hall to get going? What's that balance, I guess, is what I'm asking.
So we're not their single point of backup. They have a sliding scale of calling in resources as they need them. What we do is we fill the gap as those resources are coming. And so the next vehicle that's available might be a pager crew today. They might have 2 staffed ambulances on a day like today. So they might have a staffed ambulance in the station. It might be on a call in Kimberley. It might be in the station waiting for the next call. It really, what the fire service does is we fill that gap when it's present and needed. And so it's just that we're getting busier.
Right. So if we're out on a call, we always fill the gap and make sure our hall is good to go. Are they doing the same? Or are we ending up being there? We're waiting for staff to get to the hall. They'll be here in 30 minutes, but in the meantime, off we go. I guess that's the gap I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, and I don't know about the transfers because they don't involve me in a daily basis, but a good example would be if the 2 ambulances that are on in a day shift are both tied up, and it can be a lower acuity call and then a higher acuity. And we may get sent to, say, a child having a seizure. The ambulance we're waiting for will maybe be coming from Kimberley or the junction at the airport. So sometimes they have to move their next resources. So that would be a prime first responder where we maybe have a 10 or 15-minute wait for the ambulance from the junction at the airport where we are committed to that call. The transfer part doesn't really work into my normal day as a captain, but there's definitely times where once we make patient contact, we're awaiting based on maybe even something the hospital ER is busy and they're not able to exchange patients over quick. That's really common. And just the large response area, the ambulance is out closer to Jaffrey, another ambulance is going out on the highway to MVA towards Moye. Our area with that size, as a responder and as a captain, those play into our delays very often.
All right. Thanks, Paul. So
No problem.
are the collective we encouraging the province to staff and equip the ambulance services at their hall, so that they have more capacity? And I'll just use the word, I know you don't like it, but so we're not their de facto backup because they're gone. Is there any lobbying going on at the provincial level to change that capacity on the ambulance department?
From my side as a shift captain, no lobbying as the fire department shift captain.
Yeah, and so as a fire chief, yes, we are lobbying for them to do better. We meet with BC Ambulance Service, at least somebody on their executive annually from the fire chief's board in the province. And we're continually asking them to upstaff and do more. The province did they made a concerted effort in 2025 or 2024 to upstaff, and then immediately ran into budgeting problems with the upstaffing. So they did do a lot of work to try and creatively find ways to fill those gaps with transport, with backfilling and making sure that their communities, especially in rural British Columbia, where the service was more wholesome. So they have a long way to go, and it's not an easy hole to fill. There's a lot of challenges as the population in British Columbia ages. The need for service goes up exponentially, and the ambulance service isn't that nimble at this point. And so we do a lot of that. You use the term backfilling, and so they don't see us as their backfill administratively when they look down, but that it, like, essentially, if the nuts and bolts blue collar conversation is, that's kind of what we're doing. But in a way where they're actually trying for us not to be as involved in their service. It's just running away on them. Like it's the social problems in the province and the healthcare issues that we're facing.
So maybe it's time for a resolution at UBCM. I guess we've missed our.
Certainly, I think there's absolutely opportunity for councils to go to UBCM and lobby together across the province. I think that's the only way this is going to change. For BCEHS to get a seat at the Treasury and get more money to do the work that we all want them to do is going to take a really strong concerted effort across the province. And I think UBCM is the platform for that. Did you want to add?
Councillor Ray. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
If you don't mind, I'll just add a little history too. So originally when our first responder program started, there was no ambulance at night. So that was a huge driving factor. There wasn't any appetite for an ambulance at night. Then we saw the change. So that was members responding from home on pager to fill the ambulance car at night. And then it followed with members being part-time and in the hall at night. And now we're staffed with 2 ambulances at night. A day shift is normally staffed with 2 ambulances during the day and an ACP as well. That's a really advanced level of paramedicine. And we're still seeing a demand for our service. It's kind of, we've seen the growth in the demand and what people call 911 for grow greater. We've seen Cranbrook change where the actual need for legitimate 911 calls in the medical are way greater. And the service has grown with it. The demand's growing. They have put in an effort, and it's just hard because the demand is that great.
Councillor Ray.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you very much for the presentation this morning. You know, I think it's helpful to go through that history for those of us who weren't at the table, who are in the community, just kind of watching it happen from the periphery, and, you know, how frustrating to be at that first responder level and not be able to give even an aspirin. I mean, I think I can only imagine the frustration. And so I think the community really appreciates the EMR level of service. And yeah, I'm sure we can all think of examples where we know that's made a real difference. You know, of course, as was alluded to, the increase in calls for pre-hospital care has been a top of mind concern. So it is very encouraging to see that going down and leveling off for these last 2 quarters. And as the chief mentioned, you know, we don't know the specific causation on that, but I would suggest that we have a strong correlation with the very coordinated full court press from our social agencies working together. I think there's a very strong correlation with that work and the decrease in leveling off in the pre-hospital care. So I think it highlights the importance of that multi-agency approach on the nonprofit side. So yeah, because we're an ecosystem. We're all interconnected. And so I think that is very encouraging for the community and also very encouraging for the fire department to hopefully have that feel more manageable and hopefully somewhat decrease stress level from that work, because I know that's been very intense. Just thinking about, the potential for increasing risk and work on the fire side of things. I think the survey that's currently out around fire smart activities in the urban area is very important. And I look forward to our next steps with that, so that hopefully as a community and as residents, we can at least help mitigate somewhat that fire risk around, just fire smarting activities. So I think together, if we can mitigate the risk and the workload to our fire department as much as possible, I think that's a helpful thing. And then just one last thought, which is a little bit of an aside, but again, thinking of that broader community view. The fire department does a really good job on social media. And so maybe there's an opportunity for the fire department to also just amplify messaging around first aid skills and training among community members, because as you mentioned, it was a community member who started CPR in that particular case. And that's just a potential community activity, but we're all in this together. And we appreciate all the work you do. And again, I just think the community is so appreciative of the EMR level of care.
Thank you. Councilor Bissett.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the presentation. One of the things is we listen to what's being said during budget time and that. And so one of the things, we've heard over the years about the increasing stress coming from the medical calls. And I'm not sure if I've correctly interpreted that medical calls I've always thought of them as what we do when we're not on a fire. They're lower priority. They're almost a choice. And I'm not sure if that's correct. Because I've looked at when I hear that, the fire service is under stress and we don't have enough staff and we've got people on leave and, all those pressures that we hear about, then I'm thinking, well, a solution is let's give up the medical calls.
Yep.
Am I wrong?
You're certainly not wrong. And so what's been happening in this committee, the whole conversation as I was building the presentation, it allowed me the opportunity to pause and look back at the messaging that I have been giving to council for the last 2.5 years. And so we were going through an acute rise in medical call volumes, which you were hearing from me in real time, right? It was causing stress on the organization as we were growing really, really fast. But council did some work with us through the budget, and we increased staffing numbers minimally, and we filled some of those holes as we went along. And without knowing that the increase was going to stop and that we would stabilize in our call volume as we have in the last 2 months, the messaging continued that I was certain that we couldn't keep up with the rise in call volumes at 30% per year because they were going up that fast. But in the last 2 quarters, I've seen a drastic sort of shift in what I see at the station in the day in terms of our staff being able to manage the call volume with the resources. And it comes from that stabilization and drop in call volumes. Our system, our supports are in place and they're functioning really well. We have talked about that a couple of times with respect to our mental health resources and some of the things that we've done to try and increase the resilience of our operation. And so those things have matured to a place now where staff are actually asking me not to continue adding more resources because they're doing fun, they're doing okay in a world where doing okay is relative, right? Like we are working in a really busy city that's growing. For a period of time over about 24 months, we were growing too fast to be able to keep up with it. And that's the messaging that you did clearly hear from me is I had concerns about staff's ability to keep up with that demand increase. And in the last 2 quarters, I've seen a very clear shift in that issue. But I'm not, at the same time, I'm not saying that the city's not growing. We are growing and there are other things that are still putting pressure on us, but we're managing those things really well.
Okay, and further to that, one thing that we've thrown out as just an option is I mean, our fire service are well-paid professional firefighters. And we pay a premium for that. And my impression is that people who are on the ambulance service are not paid to the same scale that our firefighters are. Again, I could be wrong on that one too. But
Pardon?
I've thought, isn't it cheaper as a city to fund another ambulance and a couple of ambulance attendants than it is to fund another fire truck and fire people? And that's one of the things that's been thrown out in the air. Is that a correct thinking
So
process?
it does happen in jurisdictions across Canada. In the province of British Columbia, the ambulance system is legislated to be BCEHS. And so as a fire department, Councillor Graham did bring up, there's pilot projects up north where they're really remote, isolated communities that have signed an agreement to provide ambulance service inside the fire station because there isn't an effective ambulance service in the community. Terrace, I believe it is, or Kitimat has that model. But they're running it with fully paid, similarly paid firefighters as well. And so there's no, I don't have a lever to pull to say that we can just run an ambulance station cheaper than the province is doing it and better, because it's through legislation that the ambulance service exists through BC Ambulance. They are the only legally allowed body that can transport patients to a hospital. And so we would still be stuck with it. We can't transport them to this. We just have to hold on to them until the ambulance shows up anyways. And so we do have a pretty, there's a significant challenge in the province in terms of sorting this whole issue out, and we're in the middle of it. But I do think that the model that we have right now actually is functioning decently well, as long as the ambulance continues to grow to the need that the people in the province of BC need for pre-hospital care. And just to further answer your question about, is it an option? And so opting into first responder is absolutely the community's option. We have the option to opt in and to opt out of the service. They've provided us other levels of options in terms of what level we engage with, and trying to balance the resource needs with what we're actually doing for community. This is more council's issue here, and I can see it as a fire chief that in front of you, is that stepping away from first responder services at this time would be very challenging in the community, because the model across the province of British Columbia is based on the fact that first responder exists. And so to pull that away from the community members, there would be a huge void in care. And I can confidently say it would have a massive impact on the health of the community. Just they can't adjust that quickly.
Councillor Peabody.
Thank you, Mayor. Scott, you and I had a conversation a little while ago, and you were talking about the choice of fire trucks that the fire services is using, and how, two things. I think one, you were talking about how they're easier to repair. I don't know if like parts are more accessible, but also how we switched maintenance to be more internal within the city as opposed to having external. I'm just wondering if you can kind of speak to that, like as far as some of the, I guess, cost efficiencies that the department is working on, and if there's other things that the fire department is doing to help reduce costs.
Yeah, so Councillor Peabody through the mayor's chair. Yeah, that conversation was, we were discussing the use of apparatus. And so our wildland fire engine, our bush truck, is a Ford F550 with a box on the back, carries a little bit of water around with it, and it has the first responder medical supplies. And Captain Relkoff was talking about how he, as a captain on shift, if a medical call comes in, he would send that vehicle as its primary responder. So we're committing a pickup truck that's designed to do wildland fires and medical calls specifically to go to that call. And so that's a lot cheaper than trying to run a 55,000 pound fire engine to a medical call. The fire engines, they require more maintenance. When they break, it's a lot more expensive, as you've seen me in front of council asking for money to deal with repairs on the big engines. It can go to Ford and get fixed, or it can go to the shop in our public works yard. So yeah, we do our very best to make sure we're sending the cheapest piece of equipment that we can get there responsibly with, but also have the ability to leave that call when the ambulance shows up and still be effective and efficient in the community. And so lots of people wonder why we take a fire truck to a medical call. Why don't you just take a pickup truck? Well, if you leave the medical call and you have to go to a fire call, you do need resources to respond to the next call. And a lot of our incidents in the community are back to back to back. They don't come back to the station. They just keep running. And so we do that, and it's a very effective tool to keep costs down in terms of we're not wearing out our $1 million apparatus, we're wearing out our $250,000 to $300,000 apparatus. It's quite a bit cheaper. With respect to fleet maintenance and services, and Captain Relkoff's had a lot to do with this because he was leading the fleet program for a long time. We have our public works QP mechanics that have been and continue to be emergency vehicle technician trained, so that the apparatus that we're using in our fleet in the community is being maintained with our own staff on a preventative maintenance basis rather than a wait till it breaks and then try and fix it and get it back in service as fast as you can. And so we're seeing a lot of success with the public works team down in the shop, taking care of our apparatus and putting it on just a regular set of maintenance schedule. And that is, we're seeing a lot more uptime, which means the vehicles aren't down, and it's a lot more reliable for us to use, and certainly a lot cheaper than sending it to a shop.
Thank you for that. And I know Captain Relkoff was talking about how I think for a lot of situations, you got to have 2 vehicles brought to the to the scene. That way, if there's another call, half the team can leave. Is there, like, council is tasked with the trying to reduce costs. So in these situations, is it better to sort of increase the risk and keep 1 truck and the department in the station and only send 2 crew members out to the emergency response call? Or no, is the risk too great that we should have 2 vehicles respond to a lot of these situations?
What I'll do is I'll just let Captain Relkoff talk about why he would send the second apparatus, because there's a very real reason why the second apparatus goes.
So taking not into account providing fire service, the decision for the second apparatus, that risk decision, is also a work decision. So a call like a cardiac, we're going to want all 4 staff, especially if it's viable, to be able to perform all the duties needed to do the care. 4 staff is not a lot of staff. If we add 2 more ambulance attendants that are doing things like IVs, securing a different style airway, they're busy doing that. If we add the ACP, the advanced care paramedic, he'll be pushing drugs. That would be the type of call for the second piece of apparatus where everybody's working. CPR is exhausting. You do 2 minutes on the chest continually. You get up, the next person rotates in. We try and use 2 or 3. 1 person has to chart as well. There's a legal responsibility to chart, have all the information, all the times, everything done. That would be a prime call. So if we believe that call has that potential, we send that staff. If we get there and right away we don't get a shock or an indication that this is a viable call, that engine drives back to the call, the bush truck stays on scene and maybe finishes, or the engine stays at the call and responds from the call. Our biggest cost is our staff. So we're trying to balance out for the taxpayers, not calling in extra staff when we don't need to, and using every location in town as a responding home base. It is challenging. It's that risk managing. It's being fluid enough that you bring and have the right tools for the next call, but it's so we don't create labor costs on top of it. It is diesel fuel, it is wear and tear, but it is people having cardiac arrest and in that high level. Also, we'll find a place where risks are. So if we can't control the environment in an encampment, in a high risk place in Cranbrook, some of our buildings are a little unruly. That's where we want the extra staff just to be watching over. Because if you're head down providing patient care, it's not a great thing. Could we use RCMP? Yes, but they're tasked as well. So it's not at the level of risk where it's wait for police. It's a level of risk where we're trying to manage that. In the event another call comes in, we might pull out of that call because of the risk. We might bring the patient out of the call. We just have to continue managing this very dynamic environment in the community. When I go, the goal is the patient. I want to be able to provide the best level of care we can for that person who called. And to me, it's hard to think of staying able to respond to the next call and worrying about the diesel fuel, a little bit of wear and tear. I know that's where we're at as a community. We're looking at where we can take little things and chop them out, but we're working really hard as a department on the labor side, because that's the big cost, the overtime cost, the backfilling the hall. We're trying to manage and stay ready to respond to everything. So as a captain, that's in my daily thing. I managed risk on a call a while ago. The second we finished, we got a structure fire. It's very, very real.
I'll just add to that conversation. And so as we have staff coming up the ranks, so if we have a senior firefighter that's becoming a team leader, is that the new deputy chief of operations and myself will have really frequent conversations with them post calls. So we listen to the calls when we're at the station doing our work, and we can hear what their resource requests are and how they're dedicating resources to the call. And in that probationary period as a new officer on the shift, kind of managing the resources on behalf of the city, is that we keep an ear out for, and we do our very best to continually train that staff to have a risk management tool ingrained inside their thought process that limits the amount of resources. So he gets to go out to work thinking about the patient, but the tool that he's using has been built by us in the management side that is very aware of resource use. And so we see really efficient use of resources. Kind of it's something that we build and we develop in our team as they go, as they mature into the roles that they're having. And so Paul has been doing it the longest. He probably has the best, most useful, efficient tool. And our new staff that's just coming on now, because there's a vacancy in the department, is that's a member that we need to work on and make them make those decisions. But what we need to do is we need to give them the autonomy to be able to make the decisions based on safety and risk and workload and what's in front of them. And so it really is a dynamic process that we work with for a long time, and we have constant conversations about it getting away on us or coming back, or incidents that we want to chat about, like, why did you do this? Yeah, and so we are actively managing it the best we can with the operational tools that we have. Sorry, the dispatch is just trying to let us know that they're still in contact.
And sorry, Councillor Peabody, it doesn't look good to the community. So I understand it. When you see 2 fire trucks instead of 1, we understand it, but it's just not the reality. The reality is it is a better use to be able to cover the city. And I don't know of something coming out, but it's forgotten instantly when we have the communication that our goal is to stay ready to serve the community, but it does look bad. We try and make sure when we leave, when we go to areas and we've deployed too much apparatus, to pull back quickly, because then it becomes on your plate. How many of you have been commented by a member of the public, oh, I've seen 2 fire trucks at Cranbrook Street time and time and time again. It's real.
Seal Virtual has a comment.
Actually, just something Scott and I touched on a little while ago, but this might be the time now that we're in front of council. Scott, is with the re-signing of a new agreement with BCEH or A ambulance service, emergency health service, the need for like the province to recognize the work that we're doing that kind of gets into the pre-hospital care that does touch on sort of healthcare. Is there something going on with the Fire Chief Association or something council could raise at UBCM around potentially the province helping to fund the municipal costs? In terms of is there a discussion at the Fire Chief Association, or is that something council might want to raise at UBCM?
Yeah, certainly. I would continuously and always support council approaching the province through UBCM to try and find ways of getting that financial support towards the fire service. And I'm not unaware that UBCM has had resolutions go through year after year after year without the province actually reacting to it. And so it's just finding a way to get it kind of through the filter that they have, where they just say thank you and never do anything about it. But certainly, like, the new first responder service agreement comes with a supplies contract where they agree to provide supplies to rural and remote communities across the province. We're not technically a rural or remote community, but we did get an addendum that showed that we might get those supplies. So that could save us around $10,000 a year, or just below $10,000 a year in supplies. And so I pushed really, really hard to make sure that that's on the board for every department in the province, at least that small token of, oh yeah, we're going to start paying for the supplies that, and Mark mentioned the Fire Chiefs Association of British Columbia. So Chief Derby, who's the president of the association, and he's the fire chief in the Trail and the Kootenay boundaries, is that he made it really, really clear the last time we were lobbying the province is that this isn't about the service. This isn't about the community that's deciding to provide the service. Those healthcare supplies and that's about the patient. There's only one patient. It doesn't matter who's in care of them and whose license is hanging onto their neck to keep it stable. Is that we have one patient in the province, and it's their patient. It's their jurisdictional responsibility. We're really trying to flip the conversation and say, hey, we're choosing to come in here and help because there is a need that's been identified, and the patient is the one that needs it. And so certainly I think there's opportunities for councils and the Fire Chiefs Association to join forces. Hopefully the union would be involved in that one as well, but I can't speak for them. To try and bring a conversation to the province and start talking about the transition from, hey, you chose to be here, to, hey, we need you here. And I've very clearly heard the words from Ms. Heppel, who's a executive director of the BC EHS, is she's talking about the need for first responder services, not the desire. And so they have got to a place now where their administration is recognizing the importance. They just haven't got there through the Treasury. And I think those opportunities are what council should be focused on. And certainly I'd be happy to do some work and help with that.
Thanks, Scott. I've got a quick comment and then a couple of questions. I think I get a sense that we're going to have a couple more questions going around the table. First of all, Scott, thanks earlier for mentioning the public works staff. I don't think that people in the community, especially, councils in the past have not really fully appreciated the value. They, in my experience, have been vital, to operational readiness and reliability. Those guys are unbelievable. I mean, really, when you look at, they're almost a second line in the fire department, and the firefighters have such a good relationship. They treat them like they're a member of the department, so they're that valuable. Scott, age demographics for first responder calls. Do we have that type of information available? I'm just curious. Cranbrook is noted to be one of the top senior communities per capita in Canada. And I'm just curious if we have your some call information, statistics on demographics in Cranbrook of age and calls.
So I don't have that data collected at this time. Certainly I have a new deputy chief that might be able to find that, but I'm not certain that we actually collect age data on calls.
Just curious.
So it would be a challenge to get as there's some privacy issues with respect to calls, and I have not seen on any of the data that we collect in the fire service age as one of the qualifying.
Okay. I mean, we all know that, seniors and elderly, are more prone to medical issues, right? So it's just kind of interesting. Where I was going with that, Scott, is, I had a vision at one time, when I was wearing your shirt, that, Cranbrook could kind of be this city that would be, one of the healthiest communities to be in. We'd have our community programs, that encouraged, health and whatnot. But, I always looked at senior life-saving programs. So, could we, if we've got a seniors population, that's one of the highest in the country, should we not be providing, and I'm not saying the fire department should be doing this, either through our Parks and Rec, get funding from the province. These are pilot projects I'd like to see. And the one thing I tried to drive years ago, and the school board wasn't interested, but, I think we may be getting a better relationship with the school board as we move forward, is that every person that graduates that come out of there has some basic life-saving certifications. I remember in the 90s, an article I had read that if you were going to have a heart attack in the US, Seattle was the best place to have a heart attack. They had public defibs and that years and years before anybody else did. And they're on the map. And, you know, I'm not trying to put Cranbrook on the map. I'm just saying, we got all these youth, and I'm thinking, you know, grade 10 or above, you know, where they're going to retain that when they go. Hey, they're going out in the world, they're leaving Cranbrook. It could be a game changer. So anyways, your thoughts on that, Scott?
Yeah, so every chance I get, I'll affirm the fact that prevention's cheaper than suppression. Like, response is an expensive endeavor, and in a community that is dealing with challenges for response, is that we need to be looking at prevention in all the different ways that it could be delivered. Currently, our prevention division is maxed out. They're dealing with what they can do, but if we're going to apply resources to one end of the conversation or another, prevention is the place to do it. If I can just take a moment, is that a couple of weeks ago at the Wildfire Resiliency Conference, we had a Deputy Chief Director, Executive Officer from CAL FIRE come and do the keynote speech. And she said she had over $4 billion worth of resources at the Palisades fire, over 1,000 fire trucks and 10,000 firefighters. She did not have enough resources to deal with the fire. And her message was, no one's ever going to have enough resources to deal with the fire.
Yeah.
If we want to make a change to the system, we need to look at prevention. And that was billion with a B.
Certainly. Good. We'll go around one more time. Councillor Graham, anything else? No? Councillor Popoff?
Yes, just one. Are we still getting value with our contracts with the regional district and ACUM?
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Ray?
Thank you, Mayor. We've touched on the importance of resolutions to UBCM, so I think that's something I'm hoping council that we can look into. And I think it's also those meetings with ministers. So to identify the most appropriate minister or ministers to highlight this issue. I know sometimes it can feel like maybe those meetings don't produce anything year after year, but we need to try, and we need to try on behalf of our community. So maybe we can talk about which minister or ministers are most appropriate to include this as a conversation.
Thank you for that. Councillor Bissett? Nothing? Councillor Peabody?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, touching on the subject of having the province subsidize our fire department, I think that's a great idea. Cranbrook, and I'm sure a lot of other communities, we are becoming that social service hub, and that is bringing members from other communities here that are, we're paying to help. We're also the regional hospital too. So I think, as evident in your slideshow, our calls are increasing substantially. We've seen a dip, but I bet that dip is still substantially higher than what our calls were, 10 years ago. Is it worth reaching out to our MLA as well? I think we're fortunate enough that we have an MLA that does live in our community and probably has seen the change. He might not be have the ability to directly make a difference, but at least he can start advocating for us with the province. That's a question for you, CEO, for Joe.
I guess if I just offer one thing is if council could give direction to administration, I'd like to pursue it. As Scott said, like many things that have gone to UBCM, you got to do it year after year after year, but it does build us a platform that, as Councillor Peabody said, if we want something to approach the MLA to champion for us, we could set up the minister meeting for the fall. We could do another resolution. Like we can just keep driving that. And the more that communities do that, and for example, the Fire Chief Association, if we get involved and partner more with them, I think this whole realm of the pre-hospital care and what we're seeing, I really liked what Councillor Peabody just said, that I made some notes about when you're a regional center, you're providing that care for the region, and it's a provincial number of folks coming to Cranbrook for those services. It's not just the city of Cranbrook residents that we're providing the care for. So it does change the math a little bit, that residents of Cranbrook in their property taxes are paying for hospital care for folks from around the region that are coming to get the services here versus, paying for that service for the residents here. So I think there is something there that we could possibly push on, and just the more that we work on this, I think the better. But I certainly wouldn't mind if I had that direction from council.
Councillor Peabody.
Okay, thank you. And I guess just supplemental to that, like I'm sure there's other issues too that, we're experiencing, on the municipal level that should be brought aware to our, the provincial level. I know it was requested when, when our MLA was first elected, to have a meeting with him, and maybe that might be a good idea at a future committee of the whole meeting to have Pete Davis come here, kind of talk about what the province is working on, but that might also be a good opportunity for us as a council to raise some of these issues. And might be a good idea to have some structure there too, as far as like what are the main issues that we do want brought forward. But it would be a good idea to get that conversation going.
Very good point. Councillor Bissett.
Thank you. I do think the ministers' meetings are an appropriate way, because then you're talking directly to the minister. Going through an opposition MLA has another flavor to it. And I think we're probably a slightly more effective going directly to the minister.
Certainly.
And so that it's not adversarial, it's not a criticism, it's what we need, or letters to the minister directly, I think are also possibly more effective. We have to be aware of the dynamics of what's happening in the legislature, and I'm not sure that that's an effective way to go.
Good perception. Yeah, there's a lot to be said for that. Further, council? Anybody on the panel up there? Any final comments? Oh, Councillor Peabody.
Maybe this has been done at a previous council meeting, but should we congratulate Murray on getting the position of deputy chief?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
Congratulations, Murray. Yeah.
I think his new name is Deputy Chief Robertson. He's got to get used to that, so it might as well start now.
Yeah.
They're at the seamstress. They did just show up.
Boy, it must have been a close competition. He didn't have his white shirt waiting for him there, eh?
There were no guarantees, I promise you. Council, what I would like to do just before I go, and I know Paul does want to say something as well, is just, I really appreciate the opportunity to sit here at committee of the whole meeting. I think we did get some messaging a little bit misconstrued in the past, and I think we're on the path to having healthier conversations about first responder medical. It is a complicated topic. There is never one lever that you can pull that fixes all of the things. And so these opportunities for us as a fire department to sit in front of council and try and explain the complicated nature of the business that we do are very much appreciated. And yeah, so I wanted to thank you for that opportunity, and then I'll just let Paul finish up.
And again, very similar. Thank you very much for raising concerns. Concerns are just questions, and I appreciate them. Anything I can do as a shift captain through this type of style would be great. I'm very passionate about what we do. I think it matters to the community, and I'm thankful for you bringing it to us. Thank you.
And thanks very much, Scott, Murray, and Paul. And with that, brings us to the end of the committee of the whole meeting. Can I get a motion to adjourn? Councillor Blissett, Councillor Peabody, all in favor? Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you very much, guys. That was a very good session.